Members of the LGBTQ community, which includes, of course, trans people, are 1.7 times more likely to commit domestic violence, intimate partner abuse, than heterosexuals. So yeah, trans people are disproportionately victims of violent crime more than heterosexual people. But disproportionately, that violence is being perpetrated by their own intimate partners. And since only roughly 3% of the heterosexual population finds transgender people attractive, we're talking about members of the LGBTQ community. Because again, if only 3% of heterosexuals are willing to be in a relationship with a trans person, then that means that 97% of the relationships that trans people are in are relationships with members of the LGBTQ community. Meaning, most of the violence that they're suffering is from intimate partners, and most of their intimate partners are from the LGBTQ community. So this is queer on queer violence, not transphobes. Trans people, LGBTQ people are both the victims and the perpetrators of most of the violence in their community. It means the violence and the crimes that are being committed against you are largely being committed by you. 58% of the inmates who are in prison today who identify as transgender were convicted of violent crimes resulting in death or serious harm, with 58% of their victims being women and children. 48% of trans women in prison were convicted on homicide charges versus only 21% of male prisoners who do not have gender dysphoria. About 44% of trans women inmates are sex offenders, while only 16% of other inmates are sex offenders. Now, roughly only 3% of the population identifies as LGBTQ, including trans, but they constitute around 8% of the prison population. About 7% of young people identify as LGBTQ, including trans, but they comprise as much as 20% of the people in youth detention centers for crime. Statistically, about 30% of people in the LGBTQ community, including trans, abuse illegal drugs, while less than 3% of heterosexuals do. Illegal drug use, by the way, is a crime. Trans people are also more likely to be addicted than anybody else. Roughly 9% of transgender people are involved in prostitution, while only 1% of women who do not have gender dysphoria are involved in prostitution. And again, just to clarify, prostitution is still illegal in most places. It means it's a crime. So no, transgender people are not less likely to commit crimes than people without gender dysphoria. And no, I am not deeply misinformed. Now,